Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
Welcome to Your Take, the interview channel. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to the channel. On today's Your Take, I'm joined by a former army veteran who has rebuilt his life through music. After serving with the 1st Battalion, Princess of Wales Regiment in Afghanistan, my guest was discharged from the army on grounds of ill health. My guest's health condition left him in constant pain, caused his eyesight to falter, and led him to depression. Determined not to go down a slippery path, my guest decided to go back to his roots and one of his passions. Through music, my guest has composed his own songs, which he describes as acoustic, original songwriting, with a touch of Americana and poetry based. He's now gone on to write and record an EP, headline the O2 Academy in Islington, and collaborate with a high calibre of musicians, including keyboardist Hugg of the Manfreds, harmonica player Ian Duck, who has played with Elton John, Preskett, who did string arrangements on Gerry Rafferty's Baker Street, and country musician Lynn. On today's Your Take, I'm joined by Liam Wakefield. We discuss Liam's life story and journey, his childhood and musical roots, his time served in the British Army, his illness, using music as a therapy, and what the future may bring. Liam, a very warm welcome.
Hey.
Thank you kindly for joining me this morning for Your Take.
Thanks for having me.
Looking forward to hearing your story and talking about all aspects of your journey. But to start with, I kind of wanted to delve into the very roots in your childhood, the beginnings. Can I begin by asking you when and where you were born? Can you share with us who your parents are, what they do for a living, and lastly, do you have any siblings?
Yeah, so I was born in a little town called Crawley, which is in West Sussex, and in 1990 in the summer, July. And my dad and mum, I never knew my mum growing up, really, so I was raised by my dad as a single parent. And I had 3 sisters, but only one lived with me. So it was just me and the middle child sister, so one that's just older than me. Me and Emma, we grew up together with just dad, and it was a interesting start to life, really.
I kind of want to explore a bit about your relationship with your father, because you said you were just brought up solely by him.
Yeah.
What did he do for a living, and did you have a very close relationship due to those circumstances? And did you get to rekindle your relationship with your mother, or can you describe what that relationship was like?
Yeah, so my dad's an artist, and he originally was a toolmaker, and he gave up his position as a toolmaker to look after me and my sister. He was things that happened led him into the situation where he'd become a full-time parent and had to look after us as really young kids, and which was, and he did a fantastic job, and he's always going to be my hero till the day we're gone. He's an incredible man, and but he always did art, and as we got older, he then pursued that as his profession, and he's ticked along doing his art, which is just fantastic art as well. And just an incredible person. From the mum side of things, we tried rekindling things now and then, but I think there was so much fractured history there that we just never really connected properly again, and things just dissipated. And when I had kids, I tried to rekindle again with that, and just struggled to find that connection. So no, we sort of had no contact anymore.
It's interesting to hear that your dad gave up this career to become a full-time parent, and you see him as this hero figure. And then second to that, you come from this creative artistic background, which I kind of wanted to tap into next, because you grew up in a musical household.
Yeah.
Your father was this creative influence. What music, Liam, were you exposed to from a young age, and what music did you discover yourself? And second to that, when did you begin learning guitar, and did you have a tutor, or were you self-taught?
So my first exposure to music was again my dad. He always played guitar. There's always instruments lying around the house, same as there was always records around the house and a record player there ready to be played. Dad loved Bowie, he loved the Beatles, and he also loved real sort of Mike Oldfield and some real sort of soundscapes, some incredible music, real journey music. Really, it just takes you on a big journey, and it was lovely to grow up around that. And when I started to find my own interests within music, it was more on the rock side. I think growing up with Bowie and the Beatles led me down that road of guitars, drums, vocals, and then I found bands like the Stones and Led Zeppelin, and then moved on to other bands like Guns N' Roses and Bon Jovi, and they were the sort of early influences in my life. I remember being really young and having Dad's record player with the speakers either side, and I'd lay in between two of the speakers and lay on the floor, and I'd have like an Aerosmith record playing, and I'd just lay there for hours while it spun around. It was great. Really, really, really was something that shaped me in my musical influence. And yeah, so the other question, I've gone off topic.
Yeah, you're being shaped by all these influences, particularly rock music. But what age did you consider taking up an instrument and actually start learning to play guitar?
So I was a difficult child to teach, and you'll get to know this through our conversation today. Growing up, it was in every subject, even loving music. I was still incredibly difficult to show anything and listen. I just had no attention span for anything. So I wanted to play guitar, and I wanted Dad to teach me guitar, but I couldn't listen to him and learn from him. So I just wanted him to show me an easier way to do things, which there wasn't. So I struggled with that. So I just kind of did it on my own. Dad would show me little bits here and there, and then I'd just try and make sounds until it sounded fairly good. But even today, I still sound awful at times. I still kick myself thinking, I wish I'd learned properly, because there's so much I don't know, which if I'd applied myself from that young age, I would have been far more, understanding of what I'm doing, instead of just feeling along the way and seeing how it goes. But as for tutors, I remember getting booked onto a vocal tutor when I first started really getting into singing. I joined a band when I was at secondary school. I think I was 12 years old. But I would have been about 12 years old, and I couldn't sing at all. But I made friends with these guys, and they had a band, and I thought, I'll be the singer. And but I didn't know how to sing. But Dad put me onto some vocal lessons, and again, the lady was telling me how to sing, and I didn't like being told what to do. So I think I lasted about 3 lessons and walked out. And that was my experience of being tutored in anything musical. I was very, very confrontational when being told what to do as a kid, and it didn't serve me in any way other than probably suffering in the long run.
Let's pick up on that, because I think this is going to be interesting as we go along, particularly when we come on to the phase of you enrolling and joining the British Army, this whole aspect of discipline. Yeah. But for the next phase, I want to talk about education, your academia, and I think we'll probably share some common similarities here. But I wanted to ask you, Liam, where you were schooled and what your recollections are from your time there, and what subjects were you interested in and why? And did you have any early career ambitions or any desire at that phase to follow this sort of creative career path?
Yeah, when it came to school, again, I was troubled in a lot of senses. I went through a fair amount of childhood trauma as one does, going through separation with family and things that led to the separations of families, and so I carried a lot of anger. So by the time even through primary school, I struggled. I struggled with education. I struggled paying attention. And then secondary school, same again. I just always felt like an outsider. I never got on well with anything. I never applied myself properly to anything because I think I was so self-critical. And I struggled a lot with what I was doing and how I was doing things. So I just always assumed that it was rubbish, so I just wouldn't do it. And that it was really, really troubling as a kid to try and sit through that and feel like I wasn't doing very well. And I wanted to apply myself, but anytime I did, I didn't get it. I didn't get that conventional way of education. I just sort of sitting there in the rows of being told by someone how to do things, where my mind was wandering off to other places. I was thinking about other things. And I remember I always loved drama and I loved films. I remember I used to sit there in lessons and like draw and write my own little stories and poems and stuff like that. And that was fine. It was great. But then I'd get told off for that because obviously I was supposed to be doing whatever lesson it was that I was supposed to be doing. And I think I remember Dad once when I was quite young saying, you know, if I don't want to apply myself to school, then at least apply myself to something. And that's where the creative side, I really applied myself to the music. And the band I was in through the school years, I really put everything into that. And it was great. We did really, really well. But my school work really suffered. And I ended up not doing well at all, not connecting it at all. And I then had to revisit this years later in the army. I had to go back and relearn everything and do all my schooling all again. So yeah, I kind of come out the back of school with not much at all. But my ambitions were in sort of creative pursuits. So in my head, I was like, no, it's fine because I'm going to make it with music. And that's how I sort of led with the thoughts from 12, 13 till 17, 18. And yeah, and I really did believe that.
There's some similarities there between us. I kind of feel, I can feel where you're coming from. I felt school for me was very alien. I tried hard, but ultimately I kind of just wanted to do what I wanted to do, which was something creative. And I pretty much spent the majority of school living in a daydream of, you know, wanting to be Robert De Niro or somebody particularly aspiring or somebody in a creative capacity. From the end of your schooling, I wanted to touch upon if you went on to further education after finishing schooling. And I also wanted you to share with us the backstory of why you chose to join the army at the age of 19 and the whole process of enrolling, but more specifically, what made you want to make that decision?
Yeah, so it's, again, how everything has led on to one another has been such a, for me, when I look back and I reflect on it, it's such a crazy journey. It doesn't make sense at times. I sit there and think, what on earth was I thinking doing that? And but it's good looking back and thinking, okay, well, that's led to me being where I am now, which is, I feel like I'm in a great place. And coming out of school, being in a band and you know, wanting to pursue that, I didn't really think about anything else. But I did go to college. I enrolled in media studies, as you do, because I didn't know what else to do. And I loved film and I loved being creative. And it seemed like the logical step. But I lasted about 3 months, I think. And again, as soon as the element of you didn't have to be here was implied, I realized then I was like, well, I don't have to be there, so I won't be there, because you know, I wanted to be elsewhere. I wanted to be performing. I wanted to be rehearsing and doing things like that. I didn't want to. I felt like I'd almost been channeled into doing college because that's what you should do. And I went through that stage where I was just pushing back to the world, being like, no, I don't want to do what you're supposed to do. I want to do what I want to do. And this isn't what I want to do. And I remember a tutor at the college was like, well, you don't have to be here. And I was like, well, and I remember one day I was waiting at the train station and I saw one magpie on the train track. And I used to do that thing where you'd salute the magpie. And if it was one, it was, you know, one for sorrow, two for joy. And I remember it got into my head and I was like, there was one magpie on the train track and I was going to college that day and I was like, yeah, that makes me sad. No, sorry. I was like, I'll go home instead. I just walked home. I didn't get the train. I never went back again. But what that did is it put me into a position where then all I had was music. And then when the music started to take off, which it did, it's, you know, we were playing in London, we were doing some great circuits in London, and we had a lot of interest, which was wicked. And all of a sudden, there were people saying, oh, this would sound like this lady Avril McIntosh got involved with the band I was doing at the time. She was like, you've got real opportunity here. This is really great. You know, she'd signed with Ronan Keating. She'd sorted out. She'd worked with Rod Stewart. She'd worked with lots of really big names, and she had interest in us. And she was like, this is great, but if you change this, and again, that thing inside me was like, whoa, don't tell me what to change and how to change. This is my expression of me, my art. And so I did the typical thing where I just blew it all off and was like, well, if you're going to want me to change everything, then I just won't do it. And again, you know, it was that real belligerent behavior. But looking back, it's obvious now why I was doing that. But in that moment, I just felt that everyone was out to stop me being me, which wasn't the case. You know, people just had their own agendas in what they were doing. You know, she wanted to help bring us into fruition, but also get the best from us in a way that would sell best, because it's an industry. At the end of the day, they want to make money. But I just saw it as someone wanting to take what was mine and change that and make money from that. And I didn't like that. So I remember being like, right, okay, my uncle had been in the army for 24 years. My granddad had served. So the army was always there in the back. One of my best friends growing up, he had joined and gone to the army. And a lot of kids in the council estate around there, they went off and did that because it was the next logical step, because where we lived was pretty deprived and there wasn't a great opportunity for a lot of us. And it was nice to know that was there, but I never really sat and thought about it properly. I just knew if things got real bad, I'll just go and join the army. That was always my go-to. But then when I thought about it more and more, and the music, the pressure behind the music got worse and worse. But then also with that, there was drink and there was drugs and there was the things that come along with music, and with, I guess, anything creative, you open the door, don't you, for these vices to slip in. And really, I think when you're a creative person, I think you're so close to the surface with your emotions that it doesn't take much to tip you over the edge. And because you're wearing such an artistic expression in everything you do, it didn't take much for me to slip into a bad headspace, you know, with drink and drugs. And I could see where it was going, and I thought this would be the death of me if I carry on. And I must have been about 17 at the time. I thought, I can't be doing this. I need to change something. And I remember I just shaved all my hair off and was like, right, that's it. I'll join the army. Well, at that time I wanted to join the Royal Marines. And I remember I went to Guildford to the recruiting centre, and the guy, he did the psychometric testing, but me in for some other tests, and was going through the process. And I remember them telling me it was going to be about a 2-year wait. It was a real busy wait at the time, and the army weren't recruiting, the Marines weren't recruiting as much. And again, I must have had like a hissy fit, because I went to join the Foreign Legion. I got my dad to drop me off at this is true, and it's ridiculous sitting here and thinking about it. He dropped me off at Gatwick with a bus station, because I didn't get a plane. I got a bus to Gare du Nord in Paris, and went to the centre. I gave my passport and SIM card, and I was there for a week. And I remember I met there's 2 American guys. One was called Hank, and then there was this other English guy. And they're all like, what are you doing here? I just turned 18. And they're like, what are you doing here? And I was like, well, you know, I had to wait to get into the Royal Marines, but they're all there because they literally couldn't go anywhere else. And I was like, this again was another impromptu decision made because I was being completely childish and not thinking things through. And I just wanted it then and there. I wanted to be in uniform, and I couldn't do it like with the Royal Marines. So I had a strop, and then just went, right, what's the hardest thing I can do? And again, it's that, if you look at it in the brain terms, it's that fight flight. I just ran. I was running because I didn't get it the way I wanted to in that situation. So I was like, oh, I can't deal with it. So I'll just go as far away as possible and do it somewhere else. But that week there was a real kind of eye opener. So I ended up leaving there, because they hold you for 2 weeks before they send you down to Castle Dontrey, where you do your training and you're in for 5 years. And I was there for a week, and I was like, this is not happening. And this American guy from Pennsylvania, Hank, he was like, yeah, I can't do this either. So we both jumped ship and got out of there and went to back to Garden Hall. And I called my dad and I was like, can you I had no money, I had absolutely nothing. I managed to get a call back home, and I was like, is there any chance you can get us a Eurostar ticket so I can come home? And he did. He sorted me out, which was lovely of him. And I came back and then just went into the recruiter's office the day I got back and joined the army. I said, look, can I join the army? And I think it took about 6 months and I was in.
Shortly, let's talk about this change in your career path. But before we do so, I want to come back to the music and your early impressions on that music scene. And I just wanted to ask you the name of the band and why you decided to move away from that, and also about the other members of the group. Did they go on to careers in music? Do you still keep in touch with them, or did you lose contact completely?
So the first band which I was in, which was the Black Arrows, and we were together for years, like right away from school, and then as we left school, and you know, we did really well, but we fell into that habit of just playing the pub scenes after a while. We just become almost a pub band, and I didn't like that. And we'd done it for so long, we had notoriety in doing that. People liked it, and we'd pull a crowd, and that was great. But it was missing an edge, you know, it was missing something. And then we went on, me and two of the other members went on and formed a band called Trilogy, which is where we started to get some interest. But again, it was short-lived because, you know, my decision to shave my head and give it all up. I mean, they've carried on doing music their whole lives, and you know, guitarists done incredibly well to some extent in living a life of just music, which is fantastic. But a lot kind of fell short once I walked away from it all, and I think it left a bad taste in everybody's mouth, and I think everyone was annoyed at me because we did have great opportunity, and we really did have doors opening up, and I think I closed all the doors for everybody by walking away. And I think it's at the end of the day, it's a difficult thing, isn't it, when you've got a band that have potential, but the potential kind of is easily pulled apart. If you lose one of the members, then people stopped being interested. I know at one point it was like replacing me, but it's a different band then. It wasn't the same band. And so yeah, I kind of all fell out about, well, I said we all fell out, they all fell out with me about that. And but you know, I've reconnected. We're not all best friends like we were back in the school days, but it's nice to reconnect and sort of apologize to some extent of changing the direction of the lives, you know, because we all were going in that direction for so long. When someone does a complete U-turn and changes their entire, you know, going from long hair rock and roll lifestyle to shaving your head and joining the army was so polar opposite. I think it shocked everybody.
It's beautiful because, interestingly, this story comes back full circle, and we'll come back to that obviously during the course of the interview. But what struck me so far in our conversation, you're somebody with a very driven attitude, a can-do attitude. You seem to like to do things your way and not necessarily being taught, but discovering things off your own back, which is interesting. My next question, as we come on to your phase in the army, is why did you want to go from that to being part of a very disciplined institution? Do you actually think that you needed that self-discipline in your life, and that you needed somebody or figures in an authoritarian kind of position to actually give you a level of discipline, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I got to the point where I craved it. I craved some form of discipline, some structure in life. And it's, again, that way you've just described it there, is where I'd always done things the way I wanted to, and not in an entirely selfish way. You know, I'd never actively do it in a way that would end up harming others. I would just I'd want to learn how to do it myself and try and do it a way that gave me some sort of knowledge, whereas I'd got to a point where I was living a life that wasn't really feeding any knowledge. It was just harming me. I could see it was harming me, and it was harming those around me. You know, my dad went through hell and back again, seeing me in states with drink and drugs and trying to pursue a life. And you know, I was an emotional kid, and you know, I'm an emotional man. It's not changed. I've always been an empathetic person, an emotional person, and I've taken things to heart. So the music really damaged me at the start because I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't ready to give away so much of myself, or to open myself up to such criticism as well. And that's the other side of it. So joining the army seemed to make a lot of sense, because I knew deep down that it would fill a part of me which I was missing, and that through structure and discipline I could maybe build myself back up again, build my self-esteem up again, and build my confidence up again. And yeah, and I really did. I needed that to be able to get on in life, because I was getting to the point where I could see myself heading towards a dark tunnel, and it was only going to get worse. So yeah, making that decision to join the army and be surrounded by such structured and organized life where I wasn't used to. And it didn't come as a shock to the system either. I think that kind of proved that it was the right thing to do, is when I started doing it, and you know, being shouted at and being in an environment where it was ego fueled and driven by very specific types of people that weren't my type of people either. You know, I'd grown up with my dad, who's very much a pacifist to some extent. I know I had my uncle, my granddad, but you know, I rarely saw my uncle. I saw him now and then. You know, he was always like a beacon of light. Like, look at this incredible. It was like James Bond to me. It was like seeing an action man coming back from leave, and it was great. It was fun. But, you know, my dad was the only real role model in my life, and he was a very soft, loving, you know, long-haired, arty guy that always played music. And so that was my paragon of man, which is very different to what I was witnessing in the army, when everyone was like short back and sides, muscles, aggression, and this is how we do things, attack the day. But it was great because it fed in this different side to being, which I really needed, because I was really, if you boiled it down, you know, a scared, traumatized kid that had gone through some rough times growing up and didn't really have a direction, you know, and it needed a compass to point me in a direction that was going to help me grow and going to help me shape me into someone that was of value to society to some extent.
You spent 11 years in the British Army and served with the 1st Battalion, Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment during the war in Afghanistan. Can you recollect and summarise your time served over that period, and recount the places you served, the people you served alongside, and the experiences of being in other cultures, and obviously the comrades and people you lost on that journey as well?
I wanted to join an infantry regiment because, you know, I knew it would be tough, and I wanted to put myself through something tough. And again, it was that kind of self-punishment, self-flagellate to some extent. And it was good to do that, because I found myself surrounded by people that were not like me at all. You know, I had to crush a lot of the creativity when I got there. And I think I needed to, but I just pushed it to the side. And to spend 11 years doing that was... over time, it became more difficult to keep that sort of subjugated. But in the earlier days, so I went to Afghanistan in 2011, Herrick 15. And those first period from joining to before going, I lived in Germany. So I was based out in Paderborn. And it was, you know, it was brilliant. I had such an incredible time just adopting this new way of living and being. And it was, you know, I was surrounded by such incredible people that still to this day, I still talk to so many of the people from my platoon from back then. We're incredibly close, and it's, you know, what happened was we were shaped through some really difficult times on deployment. And I didn't stay with them forever, because I took a sabbatical for a bit and did some private security within that. And then I went to a dive unit, which was based down in Southampton. worked as a mariner with them, still in the army, and made a whole new bunch of friends and different people, but that was a different environment. I'd gotten married at the time and then had kids, and it was a big change from being the infantry guy. And I had aspirations within that. I'd always wanted to be in the special forces. I wanted to pursue that. That was the ultimate goal heading towards. But as I got later down into that career, then the discovery of my health condition came to light, and it all came crashing down, really. But the friends I'd made and the people I'd spent time with in there had such a profound impact on my life, that even though at times we don't talk for 6 months to a year, one conversation with them fills you with enough warmth of friendship that lasts a lifetime. It really is. I don't see some of these guys for such a long time, and then we meet up, and it's just so wholesome, the experience with them, because we've shared so much in our history, in our past, and what we've done together. So 7 months in Afghanistan in 2011 was, for me, one of the most incredible experiences of my life. I got to really I had no responsibility back home. I didn't have kids at that point. I didn't have anything else. So I just really embedded. I remember at one point, I didn't want to go on R&R. I didn't want to go back home. I loved it. Loved being out there. I loved the thrill of being out there. I struggled coming back. I really did. I had a real adapting issues of being able to get back into normal civilization and not be in that mindset. And I really struggled with that. I didn't like the idea of just going back to being a basic soldier in camp. I liked being on deployment. I liked being operational, because it gave me a sense of worth that I didn't have in other walks of life. I didn't feel I had until I had my kids. That was the biggest change, was then when I had children, it gave me that same sense of purpose and drive of having a responsibility far bigger than myself. But I'd done other deployments after that, which weren't as big as obviously Afghanistan, but I did the migrant crisis in 2015 and 16. So I was on ship for 5-6 months in the Mediterranean. We're going to Libya, and it was brilliant. It was a great experience to sort of be able to help and do a different side of soldiering, which, going for so many years being a fighting soldier, trained to do a specific job, to then going to do something completely different and doing more humanitarian aid was a great experience. Really eye-opening.
Latterly, we'll talk about becoming a father figure and how that's changed your life, because I know you're very close to your children and they mean an awful lot to you. And we'll also talk about a radical change in your life in a different phase with your health condition and how that impacted you, and obviously being discharged from the army. Before we talk about that, what do you think military service taught you about yourself, and how did it shape you as a person going from adolescence to adulthood? And do you think your perspective or outlook of life was greatly altered at the end of your military career?
Yeah, I think it's a shock of culture change when you join the army. It really is, because there is almost a unified belief as a soldier, and they kind of squash a lot of individuality out of you. But then through that, you blossom your own individual thoughts within that, but I think you're just open to more thought leaders, where you're not in a lot of other walks of life, unless you go to uni, unless you go to these places that expose you more to people that have bigger impact on your life. Like, I remember having heroes within that environment that I was in, that I'd see the guys that are doing special operations. I'd see these guys and want to be like that. And I think to be to be at that sort of 19, 20 sort of age and have aspirations to be like someone that lives, on the same camp as you. It's quite an interesting thing. If people normally have aspirations and dreams of celebrities or, role models of a higher standing. So to be in an environment where you can see them, it's tangible, you can see what they've done to get there, and you just have to put that hard work in the same way they've done it. And I think it shapes you in a different kind of way, because there's no excuses. Like, you can't, there's no shortcuts to that. You know, if you look at let's say a political leader, and you want to become like that, you know, you can look at where they've gone, what they've done to try and do that, but you don't see their day-to-day life. You're not involved in their day-to-day life, where I was seeing the day-to-day life to these individuals that I wanted to be like. So you can't cut around corners. Like, I could see them be up at 5, 6 in the morning going out for runs. I could see when everyone else was having beers, they were putting more effort into learning certain things. And so if you just start to follow suit in that way, you can start living a way that led you to be that kind of person that you wanted to be, which was great. But again, it's still under that umbrella of being a soldier. And I think I was contained for long enough why I needed it, that containment. But I started to break out from that after a few years, where I thought, no, I missed the creativity. I missed being creative. I missed that side of me that it was in there. There's a fantastic poem by Charles Bukowski called Bluebird. In the poem, he describes about a bluebird being inside of him and wants to get out, and he kind of crushes it down and doesn't let it out until he's on his own. And then he'll let the bluebird out on his own. And that's what I used to do. I used to find moments of solitude, and I'd play music, and I'd open that up and let that version of myself come out for a little bit. And it just made the more time passed, the more I missed that, and the more I started to think maybe I'm not living the life that I should be living, because being a soldier was great, but I didn't want to just be a soldier. And I looked at my uncle, and I love my uncle to pieces. He's a fantastic person, but he's been that, and only really that kind of mold for so long now. I don't think, you find it hard to become anything else. And I didn't like the idea of not being fluid and not having motion, just being a solid structure of one form and never being able to change. I started to dislike that, and I wanted more, and I wanted to be able to be creative and expressive, and not have to follow a sect of belief and tenets that had been designed by the military for the military into making people think in a military way. And I didn't want to stick to that. I wanted to start, and I started to change. But again, I think I only got to that place because the army allowed me to shape myself into a person that could have strong enough beliefs of their own. And so yeah, it took joining the army to make me realize that I could be an individual, which sounds really strange when I think about it, but it makes a lot of sense, because before I joined the army, I couldn't grasp who I was. I wasn't ready for it. And I think being in the army and serving overseas and being in hostile environments, really put in perspective what was important to me.
Let's talk about the next phase, because you were medically retired from the army due to a degenerative, life-changing illness which left you in constant pain and caused your eyesight to falter. Can you relay the story of how the illness developed over time, and when did you first become aware you had a serious health issue?
Yeah, so when it comes to the health issue, I was incredibly fit. I was training incredibly hard. I was boxing at the time for the unit I was in, and I was booked on to go to selection for special forces, and everything was going in the fashion that I wanted it to go into. I'd planned this for a long time, and but I had this unbearable pain in my eyes, and I felt fatigued all the time, and I just put it down to overtraining. And I was boxing, so I was like, that it makes sense to why my head's hurting and why I'm fatigued. And I remember it got worse and worse, and I went to the opticians, had an eye test, and they said there's some lumps at the back of your eyes. We want to send you to refer you to get this properly checked out. And I remember when the referral letter came through, I scrunched it out, threw it straight in the bin. I was like, I don't want to know. I don't want to know, because if this is anything nefarious, then that's going to be the end of the army. As soon as they hear anything like that, you're stuffed. You put on some rubbish duty behind a desk, and that's it. And I thought, I'm not having that. I don't want anything that's going to hinder me being able to be adventurous and live that kind of life that I shaped, really. But that said, things got worse, and I stopped boxing and then went on selection. I snapped my ankle on selection, and recovering from the snapped ankle, I started to notice more and more things going wrong. My hands started to seize. My ankle wasn't healing. It was months and months and months, and it kept getting worse, and nothing was really, I just felt like I wasn't fixing, I wasn't healing, I wasn't recovering or recouping. And so I had to slow down my training, I had to slow down everything. And, you know, that then impacted my mental health, because obviously the high level of training was doing me wonders as a form of therapy in itself. So as soon as that was quelled, then I started to struggle, because I was just left alone with my thoughts a lot of the time. And I thought, oh, this is not the life I want to be living if I can't do this and I can't do this. And then did the referral, went there, and it was in such a short space of time. I got a call from my medical officer. She's like a GP on camp, and she said, look, you can't come in. You're on leave at the moment. We've got to do some more tests. And I end up seeing a hematologist, gastroenterologist, cardiologist, you know, every ologist that you can put a prefix to. I was cast in to see doctor to doctor. And, you know, it was amazing that the army could get me such high level of care so quickly and efficiently. But for me, going from being incredibly fit and healthy to now being like yo-yoed back and forth to hospital after hospital, and then coming out with this condition, pseudoxanthoma elasticum, and then all these people worrying about how I could do the job I was doing and how I could move forward with this, and the potential danger of, you know, my sight loss, my wilting in my knees, my hands, my ankles, and the other complications that come with this condition. It just all come crashing down. And I didn't know my mum well. I knew of my mum, I never really saw her. And it turned out that she had the condition as well. And she'd lost most of her central vision, and she was in a very bad way from this condition. And so it turned out it was genetic, and so I had genetic testing, and it proved. But then that brought its own complications, because it wasn't, though the army attributed to maybe the speed of decline, because I was doing so much high octane stuff, which was putting a lot of pressure on the body and put the body through its works. You know, I was a professional diver as well, so I used to do a lot of diving, which was even worse for inward pressure on the body. It made everything 10 times worse. But as soon as that genetic element came into it, the army could just go like that and be like, that's nothing to do with us, see you later. So that put a lot of fear in me, because I thought, well, you know, I'm not going to get any help. You know, the army can just retire me and that's it. They don't have to pay me out. They don't have to do anything. I was 11 years into a career that I thought would be going on for 22, 24 years. I was really stopped short and thinking, what on earth am I going to do? And at the time, you know, I was married with 2 kids, and it just threw everything into disarray. And I didn't see a way out at all.
Let's tap into that fear. And I wanted to ask you, what were your initial thoughts, or how did you hear the news that you would be discharged from the army on grounds of your ill health? And can I also ask you how that changed your day-to-day life after being discharged? And I know that you battled with depression and anxiety, and I just wanted to ask you how your kind of world came crashing down at that particular stage.
So with the news coming to me, it wasn't immediate. Obviously the diagnosis was, but the army have a process anyway that they have to go through. Lots of medical boards, lots of, they have to try and do as much as they can do, and then they have to see what the possibilities are. And so it was a long process that went through. I got assigned to a personal recovery unit, so I was taken out of the unit I was in and assigned to a specific guy that I'd work with. But I was just at home, and they'd call in, I'd go to appointments, I would go to rehab centres and try and work on areas of me, you know, so it'd be like pain rehab. I spent a month living in a pain rehab, which used to be Headley Court, and it's Stanford Hall now. And I met some incredible people also on really difficult journeys, you know, missing limbs and, you know, damaged organs in real states. And again, that was a worry, because I didn't feel I was an ill person. I thought I was, you know, super fit. You know, I was this guy that wanted to go for special forces. I wanted to do this, I wanted to do this. So my brain wasn't picking up what my body was trying to tell it, and what the doctors were telling me. So the first initial thing was the fear. So I had doctors look because it's a NORD recognized condition. So it's a national organization for rare diseases. So it's not very well known. It's there's not a lot of literature on the condition. And those that have it, it's such varying degrees of what it can complicate. And so for me, being a soldier with this condition, it wasn't like they had a wealth of knowledge to go from, like, say, if someone was in the army and had got cancer, that's happened before, and people can go, well, this is what happened, and this is how we help them, and this is how we help mitigate the situation and their discharge. But in my case, there was no knowledge of it, so they didn't know what to do, and they didn't want to make it worse, and they didn't want to exacerbate me any more than I was. So they kind of just left me and said, don't do this, don't do this, don't do any of this, don't do any of this. So I remember at one point they said, don't pick up your kids. They said, they one of the physios and the doctors had read this bit of literature, said you shouldn't lift over 15 pounds, which is ridiculous, because obviously the idea was it can cause inward pressure, and then that can cause a bleed in the eye, and a bleed in the eye would then lead to sight loss. So their initial response was, don't pick up your kids. And at that point, I think my daughter was only was about a year old, and my son, son would have been 3, 4. I was like, that's not practical. I said, how am I supposed to do that? But when I was hearing this from one side, and then my own internal narrative of thinking I was fine and not accepting what I was facing, which was the end of a career, and it just created this storm on the inside where I started to believe everything they were saying. So I started to fear everything, and I spent a long period of time of doing nothing, and that sedentary life just led me straight into a deep depression, because I felt I couldn't do anything. Anything I do made it worse, made the pain worse, made everything worse. The first thing that went was my marriage. It completely destroyed my marriage, because I was just toxic to be around. I struggled to even be a proper dad. And it was crippling me, because I felt like I had no identity, because I put so much into being a soldier. I'd lost everything, and then I couldn't be that. And then when I was told I was being discharged and the paperwork was all finalizing, it even said on my medical report that I was not fit for gainful employment after the army. So I was coming out of the army at 30 years old, and I was told by doctors and healthcare professionals that I couldn't get a job anymore. That was it. That was me. 30, you're medically retired. And I just couldn't grasp that at all. And I just went completely off the rails, completely.
I want to talk about another phase in your life and how this kind of fits into this timeline. Firstly, I wanted to ask, were you able to rekindle your marriage at a very difficult time in your life? And you became an NHS therapist. And I wanted to ask about how that happened, how that fits into the narrative today, and just ask you how you look back at that time as a therapist and why you decided to make that decision.
Yeah, so I guess going through what I went through, the marriage fell apart, and we didn't rekindle it, but we rekindled some level of friendship, because we knew we had to do what we had to do for the kids, and the kids were always going to come first no matter what. And part of the separation was I was not in a fit state to be around them, going through what I was going through. I was very suicidal. I didn't want to be here. And I struggled with that. And so the marriage took the weight of a lot of that, and it broke. And I think coming out the back of that, it took a lot of work to rekindle the friendship out of that. But most importantly, we had to do everything we had to do to make sure we were co-parenting the best we could and give the kids the best life they could. And a part of that was me mending a lot of the damage inside of me, accepting that though I wasn't a soldier, and though I had health complications that would impact everything I did, I could still live a life which I could be proud of and happy of. And most importantly, one that was there to support the kids. Going through that, obviously I had extensive help for mental health through the army. The Department of Care and Mental Health, which DCMH, which are within the army, were fantastic. I worked with some incredible people that were really supportive, but I wasn't ready for that kind of help. Again, I started to learn a lot about it, and I started doing my own courses alongside that because I wanted to help myself. I didn't want to just accept that I was depressed and suicidal and I wanted to end it all. And I wanted to understand why it was getting me in such a state. And I couldn't understand why, but I kept trying to learn and try to find out. And it was just in the process of doing that. And I got to about as bad as it got, and had an attempt at suicide. And I spent some time at a psychiatric unit for about a week, just trying to sort myself out. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I got to work with some people that really revealed a way of helping myself by helping other people. And I think the year following that, I created an organization called Realign and Re-Engage, which a fellow veteran of with me that I was in Afghanistan with, we both went forward with this in helping veterans that were going through complicated times. And we ended up helping law enforcement as well. And we went over to the States and worked with some Americans as well, with in North Carolina, Fort Bragg. And that was a real incredible opportunity for me to start to integrate those two sides to me, that shadow side of struggling with the condition and with my own mental health and helping other people. And it seemed the best way to move on from my own mental health complications was to use my understanding of it to help others. And that I spent a good amount of time doing that on my own and studying. And then that's when the opportunity came up to work with the NHS, that I took that, and that was fantastic. And it's what led me to then following music, because I was helping people with that, and again studying alongside all this as well. And I realized I couldn't do enough. I wanted to, but then when it got to that point that I realized I was trying to do a lot of my own healing by helping others, and there was something not quite right. And I think the NHS side of it was a big reveal for me, because you'd work with a patient on depression or anxiety and you'd only be able to give them 8 sessions of CBT. And you could clearly see that it wasn't enough. And the wait lists were so long, and it started to get to the point where I was like, I can't help enough. And then I realized, well, I'd tied a lot of helping myself in the helping of other people. And when I realized I wasn't doing that, I started to suffer on that as well, because I'd tied too much of myself to it. So that's when I thought, I need to step back from that and see what I need to do to heal me more in a greater capacity, and use that, use the story, use the passion that I have, and tell it in a way that it can help other people. And that's what led me to focusing on the music.
Leads on very nicely to the next question, because we come back full circle again. But it's interesting how you've used your own difficulties in life, the experience that you've seen on the front line, serving in the British Army, your dealings with depression, suicidal thoughts, also being sectioned, but using those experiences to help others. We established earlier on in our conversation that you had an opportunity at the young age maybe to break into the music industry with a band, and for whatever reason that didn't happen. But then interestingly, we come back full circle, because you decide to go back to music, using it as a therapy, but more so using it as a career option again. Did you have a particular plan or goal in place, and what made you decide to go back to music and think, look, let's give this a go again, and hopefully this time things will turn out right and I'll make a success of it?
Yeah, I guess it's that I always knew, and like I said, the time in the army, I had to really suppress a lot of that creative drive, but I knew that there was the spark there, and it was always so easy. I could pick up a guitar and just channel something through it, and it worked. It felt right, and it just seemed to fit in place, like it was that perfect jigsaw piece. And I think not feeling ready to make that put it together was one thing as a younger guy. But when I first got diagnosed and I was really going through the struggles, and like I said, I spent a lot of time doing nothing, that's when I picked up the guitar again and I just started to play. And there was so much healing through that. And I thought, well, you know, I'll put something out there, I'll play something. And within a space of a year of just doing little bits here and there, it just flourished into all sorts. I played Sofa Sounds, which was brilliant. I did the O2 Academy, which was, again, fantastic opportunity to headline that. And then I got the artist development program through Mass Records, which was invented by Robert Plant. And all these things started to come to fruition. I thought, wow, this is amazing. But again, I was not ready, again, because I hadn't dealt with or accepted the discharge. I wasn't fully discharged from the army. And then with the psychiatric centre, again, it wasn't a section. It was, every psychiatric centre has an MOD bed space. So they have like 4 or 5 MOD bed spaces. And where we work closely with DCMH, it's almost like you can go and stay there for a period of time. And that's why I was there for a week. And it was, and again, something I'm incredibly fortunate of, because I was in that bad space. And I said, because I've seen people on the other side that have done suicide attempts and been sent back home. And it's crazy, but it's because there's not enough bed spaces. And the military fortunately do get bed spaces, and there's allocations for that. And I got that opportunity. And it was in those opportunities like that to have a break from the world, to go, right, okay, I need to realign and sort out my future. And it was in that, which was fantastic. But I was doing music at that same time, and the healing qualities was fantastic, but I still hadn't dealt with some areas of the condition. I wasn't used to, you know, waking up every day in absolute agony, and thinking, is this the day that I'm going to lose the sight? And I'd had a doctor at Moorfields tell me as well, that I said, how long do I have, like with the sight? And he goes, could be tomorrow, could be 10 years. He goes, we don't know. And that, you know, to live with that anxiety, I thought, that's just ridiculous. And I did as much as I could with the music at that point, but then COVID hit, and that changed the dynamic and the landscape of everything. I didn't want to be this person just putting music out on like live streams. I wanted to be able to play with people, in front of people. I played a show just before the lockdown happened. It was a Sofa Sound show, and it was a show that I drew so much from me, and just played it to people as if they could take on some of that and understand. And I had a lady come up to me after in tears with her husband and said her son was in Special Forces, SBS, and he had passed on a training exercise. And she said listening to that music helped her reconnect to areas of herself that she had kind of grown numb to since the death of her son. And to have that experience was huge for me. It was amazing. And it was nice, you know, we shared a cry and we sort of had a good conversation about things, and to experience that through music was wonderful. But with lockdown happening and everything going into place, that's why I made the decision to move forward with the therapy and put the music, not put it down, but not pursue it in its fullest. But I knew it had the qualities, and it was only end of last year that Jessica Lynn contacted me and said, you really need to be doing this again. She was like, we should do this song for mental health, and then that revamped everything. And that's when I was like, right, okay, I'll stop doing the therapy now, and I'm going to focus on the music full time.
We'll talk about Jessica Lynn shortly, and talk about some of your other music collaborations and mentors in your life. But I want to talk about your love for songwriting, and can you tell us what inspires you to write and compose your own material? And do your ideas, lyrics, and compositions come from your own personal experiences? And can you discuss how they draw from the Americana music traditions?
Yeah, I guess like writing's always been an incredibly important thing for me. I love books. I love writing stories. I love poems. I love just trying to describe something in a different way, you know, to have a perception of life that's unique, and everyone's perception is a unique perception of life, and to then meet people that then explain it in different ways. That's why I love art. I love seeing how people can paint what they see, and it seems so different to how I've seen it. Same with sounds, So I've always had that. It's always been there. And I think when it comes to writing songs, I just sort of go through the sound in my head, or if I'm playing it on guitar, and I just sort of hum things, and it's almost like it just takes shape. There's like subconscious part of me where it just formulates, and then it just rolls one after another, seems to formulate on the page. And I recently read a book by Rick Rubin, which was fantastic, and how he describes it as if having antenna, and this frequency comes through you, and you pick up on it. And I do feel like there's this universal sound that you kind of pick up on. And as I channel it, I start to stitch bits of myself onto it, and using my story and how I see it into this sort of universal sound that just creates what it is. And I think it's magic. It's a wonderful thing to experience, and it's incredibly cathartic. But I never write with a purpose of going, oh, right, okay, so I want to write about an ex today, and I'm going to write this song because this is how she made me feel. I don't do that. I kind of just capture a moment or a line, and I build on it, and I build the feeling of it. I'm just trying to explain a feeling inside, and sometimes they come out like dreams, where a dream doesn't seem so crystal clear, but it's about something. You just can't fully identify what it is. It's just it has an essence to it.
You wrote and recorded an EP, which gained a following and a positive reaction. Can you tell us the name of that EP and the process of writing, recording and releasing those songs? And second to that, I wanted to ask how you go about releasing and publicizing your music. Do you have a publisher or record deal? And where does your main source of revenue come from as a solo artist?
Yeah, so for me, with the EP, that EP, Vagabond's Poem, I wrote just before lockdown. It was the last thing I did before having a hiatus, and just focusing on the therapy work. And I'd actually just done the whole thing in the living room, just completely raw. And that gained the best reaction from things, because I love working in a studio, and I love spending time with producers. And one of my favorite producers that I work with, Nicholas Bowen, that's at Key West Studio, someone I'll always work with, I hope, because he's fantastic. And it's a very different side to how I like to just do things. I like it raw, and I like it to just be as candid as possible, even with the faults in it. And which doesn't take away being self-conscious of putting that out there, because you can't help unhear mistakes, and you worry about how people are going to see those mistakes. But then it's interesting seeing that sometimes people don't see those as mistakes. They see those imperfections as the perfect part of the song, and it's quite interesting to see that. But I've always had quite a strange recording way. I recently just recorded 7 songs in a cabin in the woods. I've just got an Airbnb for a few days and just plunked the mic down and just recorded. And I like doing it that way. And I was going to release it as an album, but I decided just to release them as singles, and just spend the year trying to gain as much traction as I can, constantly putting stuff out there and taking that relentless pursuit, and just working with that, being constant. And I am very much someone who is driven, and when I'm in the right flow of work, then I just will keep going at it. I don't want to have these big breaks between doing things. I like to just feed it constantly, and watch it grow. It's brilliant. And having, I've got to the state now where I've got the recording equipment that I need. I've got the good equipment that I need to produce the things I want to. So when I do work with other people, it's purely out of the interest of working with other people, and not because I want to get a certain sound, or I want a professional sound, because I have the sound I like, and so I don't need that from anybody else. I just need to just keep producing the work I'm doing.
Do you have a publishing deal or record deal in place at the moment? And I was also going to ask, is the main source of income for you as a musician still on the live gigging scene?
Yeah, I mean, so with the record deal, I'm completely independent, and again, something I learned from Jessica, I mean, did become a big mentor for me, really. We got on so well as friends, and but then seeing the other side of that release with that song, it moved on from just being good friends to being someone that I really admired, like her work ethic and how much she was doing. She's putting 14-hour days. She did this huge Christmas tour, had big bands, dancers, everything. It was amazing. She did the whole thing herself, like arranged it, organized it. And it was just fantastic to see that, and to see abundance of talent, but yet be completely independent. It shows that it can be done. It's not something, you don't have to have a big label. You don't have to have a big publishing deal behind you. I mean, those things are nice, but again, you lose so much of the autonomy and you lose so much of your own licensing. And I worry about that side of it. And there's always a nice idea when you sit there and think, yeah, well, maybe it would be easier if a label took that responsibility and you can just get a paycheck from them and I can just work on the music. But then I am very driven and I like the elements of having to do everything. So I do have a manager, which is great. But I think when it comes down to the making money side, I'm not forced by anyone else. I can just pick the gigs I want to take and you make money from that. And, you don't make money from streams really, unless it's massive numbers. And again, to then sign to a record label, I lose even more of that. And then you fall into the trap of having to make money by going viral on streams and on TikTok or Instagram. Those are other elements that I'm not fussed by. I don't want to keep pushing those areas, but it's a difficult line balancing having an income and being independent. But it's like starting any business. You start your own business, you have to run the risk of not generating much income for a while. And it's a worry. There's other areas. You look at pub gigs and weddings and functions and playing covers. I remember years and years ago playing in bands and making you can make so much money doing it, but I just refused. I remember it was a couple of years ago, I played a gig at a pub and I'm only playing my own songs, which you can't do. People don't go there to listen to that. And I had a lady and I played quite macabre stuff and she sat right in front of me and I was just playing a song and she just looking at me dead in the eye and she's chatting to her friend. She goes, God, this is miserable, isn't it? And it crushed me because I was like, but they weren't there to listen to me playing sad songs, which is different to me putting on a show, selling the tickets and having people that just want to hear that. But I feel when you're forced into having to make a specific income, being a dad, having a place, and you then start going, do I have to take those gigs to make money? And I'm unfortunately, because of the medical retirement, I'm not in the situation where I'm pressured to take those sort of gigs. I can be really choosy with how I want to pursue this career. But like any self-employed business, there's risk and there's a lot of money that goes into it and the return is not a lot. So you have to love what you do.
You've had some good opportunities so far, being a professional musician. You mentioned you've headlined the O2 Academy in Islington. You released the single You Saved Me with young American country artist Jessica Lynn, which you've discussed. You've worked with musicians Mike Hugg of the Manfreds, Ian Duck, who's worked with Hookfoot, and Elton John, and Graham Preskett, who part arranged and played on Gerry Rafferty's classic Baker Street. How did these opportunities happen? And can you tell us what you've learned musically working with such a high caliber of musicians?
Yeah, I think the collection of artists, aside from Jessica Lynn, it was all on one project called Cool Star. And that was a real great experience to be a part of that. And I mean, let alone to be selected to sing on that. Anyone could have sang on that song, but to be picked out to do that was wonderful. And that gained some notoriety. There was like TV interest and with BFBS and some Forces TV, especially at the time it was done, came and videoed a lot of it. And I think that was the first time I experienced my story being used in a capacity that I was like, oh, wow, okay, it's more than just music. But then how I could shape the music to be a part of that, which was great. And I learned a lot from the people that I got to do that. Geffen was one of the guys that really had an impact. He was the one that picked me to sing the song, and it was wonderful to see people that spent their life in music and making a living out of music. And again, like you say, working with some incredible people, and songs like Baker Street and being a part of those sort of things being created is just, it's incredible. And for me to learn from that, I think I took a lot of the ability to have patience in timings. Things come around and then there's periods of time where they don't. And if you sit there and judge yourself on the periods where nothing comes about, then you're not going to last very long in this. And that's why I want to keep this momentum up, because I'm doing it at a rate that I'm happy with. And if things come along during that, then that's fantastic. But I'm just doing it the way I like to do it, and it's great. When Jessica Lynn suggested the song and doing it together, and I remember going onto her Facebook and seeing over 500,000 followers on there, and the response from who she is as an artist blew my mind. To be like, wow, this is an actual famous person. I mean, like tiny little Sussex house, thinking, what, this is well above my station here. And then thinking, well, no, we're just humans putting art out there. If we caveat that with followers and likes and streams and this other side to it, then it becomes a real deadly territory. You're sitting there and saying these things about what the accolades of certain musicians and certain producers and what they've done before. It's then terrifying to walk into that room and be like, wow, and I have to sing on their song. No, that's ridiculous. But if you walk in there and just chat to them, which is how I've always approached it, then you realize they're just human beings, and that's where the magic is the connection between a human and another human. It's magic. It's wonderful. And so I learned from that as well, just to be me. Like they weren't trying to be anything else. They're just being themselves, and that's what's got them to where they are. And I think if you try so hard to be something that you're not, then the inauthenticity of that comes through, and you don't last very long, because you struggle to look in the mirror when you're not yourself.
I just want to ask you a couple of things before we finish the interview. I want to come back to your children, because I know they mean so much to you. How old are your children, and have they caught the creative bug? And also, I wanted to come back to your health and medical condition at this current moment. Are you under constant medical guidance and taking ongoing medication? And also with the music, what are your long-term plans and goals?
With the kids, so my daughter's she's 4 and my son is 7, and they are just, they mean everything to me. And yeah, they definitely have a creative bug in them. Like, we've just had an incredible few days together, and yesterday we were making stop frame animations, which was great fun. And the day before that we were doing loads of art, and we always do loads of music. And yeah, there's definitely a flame in there to create and to be artistic, and just it's a great way to play and to enjoy life. And they love it. They definitely do. As for health, as it's a degenerative condition, it's quite strictly monitored. But where I've moved around a lot, it's such a pain having to change doctors and then change hospitals and get different appointments everywhere. So where I did work for the NHS, I was up in Shrewsbury, and I moved down in October back down to Sussex, and I'm having to change everything. All my appointments have to come back down here, so I'm having to restart the process of referrals. But for pain, they stick me on morphine, so it's that kind of thing. If I take the morphine, I'm a write-off for the day, or I can't just live with the pain and just get on with things. And it's a tough balance. I was in hospital a couple of weeks back with more sight loss in my eye, in my right eye this time, and so it's just facing that sort of the decline and what to do in that moment of when things are bad, and how to mitigate the situations, and how to try and pace life, that I don't have to keep taking morphine and keep having to be in certain situations in pain and losing the sight. It's difficult. But going forward with music, with that as well, it's living with that condition and making it work for me while I'm doing the music, so it doesn't become a hindrance. I've had issues before with my hands seizing on stage, So I have to pace when I'm doing that, and I have to do it in a way that doesn't cause me more harm living with this condition. I've got big plans of music. I want to keep writing, recording, and keep putting it out there and do more and more shows and just really make the most of this. It's my manager, who is my partner, and we've been together for a while now, and we have an incredible relationship, and it's amazing to turn that into more than just a love. It's now a working relationship as well with her managing me, because we can share the music and it's not completely isolating. One thing being a singer-songwriter is you can spend a lot of time on your own, even around people, but driving to shows, tours, in the studio, you spend so much time on your own, and that's a lonely place to be. So it's nice to be able to share that with my partner and have that managed in a way that it takes away some of the responsibilities for the business side of it, because it is a business as well. So to grow that business and to grow this as more than just songs, into it being a way for people to express and to listen to things and to share stories within the mental health. I've got a great community of fans, and it's a great bunch of people that really resonate with what I do, and I want to grow that, and I want to grow it in a way that people can connect through it.
Liam, we come to that moment. I think you're guest number 109. So all 109 interviewees have taken part in these quick fire questions that we ask every Your Take guest to find out maybe things we weren't so sure about them, that we haven't discovered over the course of this interview. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Liam Wakefield, question number 1. Don't think about these in any great depth, just what comes straight into your head. But first of all, what would you say, Liam, is your favourite pastime?
A Sunday, a family Sunday, which I did this Sunday, just a walk and a roast. And yeah, there's something so nostalgic about that, which I've missed for so long. So it definitely is.
We move from Sundays now to cinema, and you mentioned earlier on that you're a film buff, but what would you choose as your favourite film, and why would you make that choice?
Yeah, so I never used to do favourites on anything, but I realised that was probably a complicated thing for me as a person until a couple of years ago, when I really honed it down to what I loved. And for me, film-wise, Good Will Hunting will always be my number one. I just resonate with Robin Williams, resonate with his character in the film, but also Matt Damon's character. And I love the clash of intellect and mental health in that as well, and the struggles. Yeah, it's a great film.
An Oscar-winning performance, I think, from Robin Williams, and I think Ben Affleck and Matt Damon won the screenplay prize that year.
First thing they ever wrote as well together, which is a nice thing to think that that's the first screenplay they wrote that won them an Oscar as well.
And Ben Affleck's gone on to be a good director. We move from cinema to novelists, and again, you've cited an interest in books and novels, but who would you say is your favorite novelist?
I think for me, it's got to be Stephen King. So I love literature in the widest form, but I love Stephen King's books, and I've read, I'd say 90% of them now, which is, he's got a huge catalogue of books, but he's just the way he writes people and dialogue, and it's just fantastic. He really does make it so easy, yet there's so much depth.
We've discovered today that you've done a number of different things in your life, predominantly music, but you've also been and served in the British Army and as a therapist as well. But taking those aside, if you could have chosen a different profession, what do you think it would have been?
I think it would have been to be a novelist. I think I'd love to have been a writer. And I do write, but I think to have focused on that as a pursuit, if it was anything else, yeah, I'd say that would have been it.
We talk about inspirations in life, and we ask Your Take guests to choose their greatest inspiration in theirs. Who would you choose?
It'd be my dad, 100%. Yeah.
I knew you were going to choose your dad. Yeah. From the inspiration of your dad as a father figure, and obviously bringing you up from childhood and caring for you, and also a creative person as well, we go from inspirations now to newspapers. A strange transition, but do you read a newspaper? If so, which one?
I used to have an app on my phone which would collate the things I was interested in, and filter out the things I didn't really want to read. And I've got to the point now where I've stopped. I used to get so embedded into it, and to the point that it would just ruin my day almost. But I love podcasts. I listen to a hell of a lot of podcasts which bring in a lot of information about other things. But no, I've kind of stopped reading newspapers and magazines on specific subjects, and I like to devote that time to other reading.
From the daily headline news now to food, would you cite yourself as a cook, but what would you choose as your favorite food?
I do love cooking. I absolutely love cooking. It's got to be a good kitchen though. But for food wise, mine would be risotto. I've always had a predilection towards risotto. Italian food's great. But yeah, risotto's the dish for me, I think. We
got you to choose your greatest inspiration in life. Now we ask our guests to choose a cultural icon. This always throws quite a few of our guests, but it could be somebody, for example, who's a religious leader. It could be somebody who's changed the course of history, an inventor, designer, a builder, a revolutionary figure. Who would you choose?
It's a tricky one because, for me, a big part of that would edge towards someone like Bruce Springsteen, just because for obviously music massively, but more than music, he was a huge change racially as well. He did so much what he stood for, especially with Clarence. It was amazing, and I love what he stands for and how he sees the world and how he projects his beliefs, and it's wonderful. But that said, more recently, and as a psychologist side of interest, Jordan Peterson's always been a big cultural influence in me recently because of how he stands up for things and how he sees the world. And it's a matter of perception, and it's when someone aligns with somebody else. I really do connect with a lot of his Jungian beliefs. So Carl Jung's beliefs that he's kind of formed into his own. It's had a big cultural influence in me as a person, I think.
Two really interesting choices. Springsteen, I think, has dealt with his fame particularly well. And he's always been a political figure, an activist to some degree, I guess, and someone very pro veterans, helping American veterans. He's been chosen before, interestingly, by a journalist who admitted that he was a fan and had actually interviewed him. Wow. and said what a nice, humble, decent human being he was. And Jordan Peterson's, I think also an interesting choice, a very, very intelligent man. To see some of his debates, very interesting, his points and perceptions, and yeah, two interesting choices there. We move from cultural figures now to favorite curse word and why. What would you choose?
That's I swear profusely anyway. I don't know if I could have a favorite. I remember someone saying about it being unintelligible to swear as much as I was swearing, but then I've always had a broad lexicon. I've always had a wealth of words, and I just like swear words. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
any particular favorites?
I guess just the bog standard fuck would be a go-to for me, just because it's so expressive. I think it can be said in so many ways that works well. It's it's a good word.
You've lived in Germany, you've served in Afghanistan, but what would you say is your favorite place or holiday destination?
So my one of my best friends, you know, we call each other brothers because we were as close as brothers. He recently moved down to Devon, bought a lovely little house, and got his bunch of animals there and almost self-sufficient. And I go down there, and last year I went there quite regularly, and it was just a little piece of heaven. It was amazing. I just spend some time there and fully recharge, and it just had a certain magic in that house and where he was. And yeah, so somewhere like that. I've been lots and lots of places, but there was something about that place in Devon that was really, really quite incredible.
A question you never really want to ask a musician, but I will. Who would you say is your favorite music artist? And what is your all-time favorite album, or the album you go back to for a particular reason?
I don't know, it's too difficult. That changes so regularly. You know, Springsteen is always going to be one, but I think for me, it really changes mood dependent. I love Gregory Alan Isakov, and I love, you know, his album Even in Machines in more recent times has been one that's knocked me to the floor, and I've just had it on repeat constantly. But then the same could be said about Zach Bryan recently. He's fantastic in how he's approached it. But I think the musical icon side of it changes with the scenery, really. The landscape's constantly evolving. But there's a few figures there that are key in how I look at the world. So like Springsteen, they play a vital role in what it means to be a musician, I think, for me.
Liam, what would you say is your greatest achievement to date?
For me, it's an obvious one. It's going to be the kids. I couldn't have achieved anything better than having two wonderful kids, and that have gone through things as well, you know, tough things, and they had to experience me go through a tough time. But to see them be such incredible kids is just magic. And, you know, I don't think I'll top that achievement. I can only live by that and be proud of the kids that I've been a part of producing and helping grow and turn into wonderful individuals. And that's a big achievement.
And Liam Wakefield, the final your take question. Let's get very deep. How do you wish to be remembered?
I think for me, I want to be remembered in a way that I gave more than I took, and I was able to help people in a way that really meant something. You know, being a dad means so much, and to have an influence on the kids means so much. And that's shared within a family unit. It's not shared outside of a family unit to an extent. But how I want to be remembered by others is that what I did and how what I put into my music was, you know, parts of me which could potentially help other people and can mean something to somebody else. Just to have those deep, profound words written, write the prose which moves people. That'd be a good thing to be remembered by.
The final chapter of today's Your Take interview. Thanks for taking part. Obviously not the end chapter of your career and your musical journey. And I wish you all the very best with any future projects on the live scene, as well as recordings or maybe an album in the future. It's been a fascinating story, and we seem to have covered so many angles, so many areas, stemming back to your upbringing, to your education, to music, and then coming back full circle. Obviously, your difficult health conditions and your time served in the army. So thanks for sharing your story. And lastly, how do we find out more and listen to your music?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. It's been absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed sharing this story. But for other people to follow on from that journey, you know, and keep learning more and as it goes along. I'm on all platforms as Liam Wakefield Music, and www.liamwakefieldmusic.com as well. And yeah, that's the place to find me.
Thanks again, and thanks for sharing your story today on Your Take.
Thank you. Appreciate it.